We're on to Simon.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you to the Council of Europe for inviting me. Just before the panel started, Lars described the person who speaks last on the panel as like the raisin at the end of the sausage. You eat the sausage and you get the nice taste of the raisin at the end. So I hope you're all Danes and like raisins in your sausages. Through this morning we've been hearing what I think is one of these fundamental tensions in public engagement, which is the tension between wanting a wide, open, publicly visible debate versus wanting a debate that allows us to really understand what citizens in all their diversity think. And these things are in fundamental tension, it seems to me, because the former pushes you towards a debate that is carried out very much in public, in the media, is very visible in the media, and the latter requires you to take slower time with public, requires you to bring smaller groups of the public together for longer periods of time. The first might help you understand what some of the loudest voices in the public and citizens want, the things they say they want. The latter might help you understand, so the latter being those mini-publics, those slower processes, might help you understand more why citizens think they want it. And it's critical to understand that difference, because if you're asking a question in the quick time of media, in the kind of public glare of the media, what you're hearing is a very quick, we want this. Whereas if what you're asking in the slower time of mini-publics, of deliberative processes, where you've brought together randomly selected groups of citizens to be somehow reflective of the wider public, you're hearing why we want this as well. And that might help you understand how you negotiate the politics of different wants that could be in complete contradiction. And the place where you can land is either giving the majority what they want, or a third or fourth or fifth consensus that helps you meet the why of why citizens want it. And it's not that either way is right, and as we've been hearing, each of the tools have their own strengths and weaknesses. The question is how we integrate those tools, and I think it's that question that we need to really begin to engage with. It's the frontier of public engagement for me. I don't think anybody's really answered it. I think I found the French case we heard this morning really quite compelling, and I'll reflect on it at the end, and there is a slight but at the end, but it's a but from a UK perspective, not a but in terms of the weaknesses of the approach itself. So the key challenge for me, or there are two key challenges for me. One is, how do we connect the big, wide, raucous public debate, that noisy public debate, with the slower mechanisms, with polling, with surveys, which also have their roles, with citizens' juries, with focus groups, with open town hall meetings. All of these things are going to be needed if we're going to have a sustained, ongoing debate with the public about the ethics of biomedicine. And at the moment, it feels to me, certainly in the UK, that each of these things are happening in isolation, and different policymakers and bits of the political system are listening to different methods. And so we're not having a conversation with each other, we're having multiple conversations that aren't engaging with each other at all. So how do we plug public debate into mini-publics, into focus groups, and how do we plug all of that, lastly, or secondly, into decision-making? So how do we make and how do we support our members of Parliament, our elected representatives at different levels, our scientists, our businesses? How do we help them to understand what's being said through these processes, make sense of it, and act on it? And how do we do that in such a way that we're true to what we're hearing from citizens? Because critically, we've heard a number of times today as well that if we're going to tell the public that we're going to engage them through whatever method, we have to act on what they say. We can't listen to them and then carry on doing what we want to do already. So how do we do that? And I think that's a challenge, because the sorts of questions and framings that policymakers and scientists and business have about these technologies are often very different from the ones that the public have. And I think we saw that through the French example. We saw the 9 themes that were very, very technology focused. They were focused on the things where policymakers feel they can potentially have the most impact. They're in some ways less politically charged, less politically difficult to deal with. But what the public wanted to talk about was something social. It was about the organisation of healthcare. That's one, very political, very difficult to talk about, but it touches the public in their lives in a very different way than AI does. The public want to have a different conversation to the conversation that the politicians and governments think they want to have. So we can't just do what the public want, because we're structured in such a way, our laws are written in such a way, our institutions work in such a way, the questions that we have to grapple with are such that we have to take our own focus. But how do we plug the citizens' concerns and focus and starting point into that starting point for politicians, for government and so on? I'm sorry, I'm raising some very big questions and I don't really have many answers. I think the final couple of things I wanted to say was the problem also of starting from the perspective of government is that it's a position of hubris. It's a position of thinking you've got too much power. Because it presupposes, it suggests that government is the only one thinking about the questions, is the only one posing the questions, the only one with any form of solution. But citizens are talking about these issues already, prompted by films, by literature, by what they read. They're talking about genetic modification. It may be very ill-informed, but they're talking about it, they're worrying about it, they're wondering what it means for them and their children, their food, livestock, nature. And so if we, as those in power, hold open a space and says this is the only space where this conversation can happen, the public get pushed out of it. And genetic modification of crops in Europe shows why that's wrong, because it felt to business and politicians that they had the power to hold open the space. And it felt like it. The conversation was being pushed along in the way that government wanted. And then suddenly, public said no. And the public of Europe have just rejected genetic modification. So government doesn't hold all the power. It holds one sort of power. And how do we negotiate between those two different sorts of powers? And so this morning we've been hearing how the French are managing this, which is, as I understand it, and forgive me, my knowledge of this is based on this morning, so I may have misinterpreted it, but it's a process by which a body is set up to hear and to listen what the public is saying and prompt debate. And this seems to me to be the right way to do it. We need to have a way that begins to be much more porous for government, much more leaky between government and the public. But it is also a process that will work in France, but I can't see it working in Britain because we just don't organise government like that. Some of you, this is the Council of Europe, so you wouldn't possibly be so rude. Some would say we can't organise government at all at the moment. It also probably won't work in Latvia, being a much smaller country. It may not need something as managed as this. So as we need to begin to think about what are the principles by which we might organise these things? What might it look like? And what does the end point have to be? And I guess I would finish the end point being, we will know if we've got this right, if citizens are better informed, if citizens can see reflected their own concerns in the sorts of decisions that they are taking, and they're able to have conversations in the bars and in the pubs and the restaurants that they see reflected in the debates in Parliament. And then we'll know we've got it right.